What was the first sentence you said?
I'll do that.
No, I'll do that. What was the first sentence?
Yes, wishing you all.
No, that's you. This is your
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right, so we're here together to discuss how.
Start again.
Okay, we're here together to discuss how International Yoga Day is being celebrated in different cultures, different cities. We're here today to celebrate International Yoga Day. In this discussion, Manish and I wanted to share a bit of our own views and a little bit of history, specifically focused on Alberuni as a scholar, who he was, what was his contribution into what is now said to be the first translation of the Yoga Sutras to Arabic.
Friends, wishing you all 10 years of International Yoga Day. This year we chose to celebrate it in the Middle East to mark 1000 years of Alberuni's book on India. And in that book, he speaks about Indian cosmology, Hindu cosmology, science, astronomy, and philosophy, of which yoga is described. The Yoga Sutras are translated. And this, in my view, is the first time that yoga goes out in the Yoga Sutras translation out of the Indian subcontinent, and 1000 years of yoga spreading its light across the world. That process begins with Alberuni.
So if you step and we focus on Alberuni's journey, so the first question would be, who is Alberuni and why are we giving him this importance?
So this is something we've studied together, right? That he was part of the Islamic Golden Age, and he was Persian, and then as Muhammad of Ghazni started to raid India, he brought with him scholars and so on. So that gave Alberuni, he was a mathematician, astronomer, he was a polymath, and it gave him a chance to be able to interpret the Hindu culture and religion and philosophy vis-a-vis his own Muslim upbringing and so on and so forth.
He's a very proud Muslim, and he actually was, through the works that you've described, kind of shed the lights on religion from different aspects and sees a lot of commonalities. And one of the praises of his work is that he was able to bring in together those different religions. I know our conversation is not focused on religions per se, but what's the link between him eventually coming to the Yoga Sutras because of his interest in the Indian philosophy, the Hindu philosophy. And he approaches it more from a philosophical standpoint and how the values can be taken and relived throughout one of the books of the Indian philosophy, obviously, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali.
What I like is that he draws this conclusion that all ancient cultures are like relatives in the same house. So he draws a conclusion that there are a lot of similarities between ancient India and ancient Greece. True. Ancient Greek had culture and wisdom and ideas had then grown on into the Islamic world.
True.
So he sees the commonalities, which is, in my view, something that is very important in our day and age, that we're able to comparatively study cultural relativism and to be able to study a culture from its own lens.
I know there's a lot of things we can discuss in between that journey, but if you take a step forward and we link it to the topic that we want to focus on, which is International Yoga Day, through that perception and those points that he brings in, how has yoga ended up being so globalized, if I may say, or across beyond geographies and culture, especially in the modern days and the world we live in today?
It's really beautiful that the entire world is doing yoga, and you have scholars doing yoga in every part of the world. And the reason I feel is that yoga is non-sectarian. So you may have any belief, you may have any system that you've grown up in, and when you take to yoga, you take to practices, and through those practices, perspectives come about. You don't have to change your perspectives. You just have to take on practices. So it's non-sectarian. For many other cultural imports, you have to drop your culture to take on another culture. That's not the case because yoga is practiced by an individual. It's a scientific journey, a research that a person does unto themselves. So it's non-sectarian.
Yeah, and I'm sure at some point we'll touch base in a different conversation on the scientific backgrounds and how the link between science and yoga. That would be a very interesting topic to share.
For sure.
Which brings me to another question: like, is it fair to say that yoga has become timeless?
Yeah, because the subject matter is eternal, it's timeless. See, a lot of philosophical systems are dated. They were in vogue 2000 years ago, and then as the culture moved on, as ideas, as knowledge systems, the way we receive knowledge changes, we drop a lot of systems along the way. Yoga has stood the test of time because it is timeless in the sense that you're discovering who you are, the self standing in its own light. And it's not dependent on any other things that are, like we said, cultural and in the same way, time based. So, this journey, you're asking who you are, I'm asking who I am, different cultures. You, 2000 years ago, were still asking who you are, somebody in that culture, somebody in my culture. So, it's timeless because of that, because the practices, the mind is the same. We have a faster life, but the same question, who am I, is going on.
Existential question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the practices are adapted. So we've added so many more asanas than were the case in Patanjali's time.
Because of how the world has evolved as well. Yogis back in the day probably didn't
Active.
need to move as much as we do now.
Now people are kind of sedentary, so you need to do a lot of movement before you can be in stillness.
So then what is yoga? Speaking specifically about that, nowadays we find a lot of creativity around the modalities, which are an amazing way to present the subject. But what is yoga? And if you can also just link it to the sutras of Patanjali.
So yoga is one of the 6 classical darshans of Hindu thought, Indian thought. And those are 6 ways to see reality, of which 3 are non-existent, 3 still are: Yoga, Sankhya, Vedanta. When we use the word yoga, it derives from the word yuj or union, and that is the way it's described in the Vedas in many different texts. But the yoga of Patanjali, which is the classical school of yoga, doesn't see it like that, and I'll tell you what I mean. Yoga is described as yogas, chitta, vritti, nirodha. Nirodha is the cessation, yoga is describing, chitta is the mind stuff. Vritti is modifications in that mind stuff, patterns. So for you and me, we have so many patterns in our mind. He uses the word vritti, which means
So patterns of thoughts and behaviors.
Yes, patterns of thought. I have jealousy. Yeah. And he uses the word vritti, which is from the word circle. Everything in the world is moving.
Coming again.
Yeah, circular patterns. So for example, I have jealousy and it happens to me every 3 days, or I have insecurity, or I have greed, or I have some regret. And this keeps coming and happening and happening. Now I start to watch it. So yoga is the process of watching it. So friends, somebody may have told you something when you were in college. So somebody threw a pebble into the lake of your mind and it had a ripple. For most of us, these ripples are going on even today. It happened 20 years ago, but the ripples are still going on.
That's a beautiful analogy.
Yoga means the stone went in, it had a ripple then and there, and it's done. The yogi's mind is always Lake Placid, like a child's mind.
It takes a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. So that is a beautiful mind that can be present all the time. For me and you, we cannot be present because whatever situation we are encountered with, we are seeing it through our patterns, our ripples. So you don't like somebody, you never met the person, you don't know the person, but because it represents somebody else in your past. If you don't have that, each and every situation, it's very funky to say be present, stay in the now. It cannot happen unless you've come to terms with all your patterns. That process and also the state that you reach is called yoga.
Yeah. Again, it takes a lot of effort, a lot of willingness to make that change.
Yeah.
And taking the time to really reflect and observe those thoughts. I mean,
Correct.
observing them, and then once they've identified, is how do you actually make sure that you are able to work, not control them, I wouldn't say that's
Not
the right
control.
word, but eventually
It drops.
dropping those thoughts.
The really interesting thing is, it's very funky today to say, I'm not the body, I'm not the mind. And that's conceptual. Yoga is not conceptual. Yoga Sutras were written as a practice manual. If your life experience is that you have a body, you have a mind, but you don't identify with it, then you're in yoga.
So originally these practices or these ideas that were described or spoken at the time, they had a specific objective. The objective was to first focus on liberation from
these patterns. So today I think I'm jealous. I think I'm greedy. Manish is constantly changing.
But I'm focusing more on the book itself. Or now, in later, it became a book. It became a written manuscript, exactly. But back in the days, yogis would transfer word from word.
Verbatim.
Exactly. So what was the purpose of bringing all this information together?
For a person genuinely seeking liberation, if Rana, this organism, can live and exist with Rana, the story, on the periphery and not fundamental. Can you imagine how free I'll be if I'm not limited by my identity as Manish, Indian yoga meditation teacher? If that is a help and not a prison, then this organism will be free. And that's the purpose of yoga.
So technically, would it be fair to say that, in your views and opinion, the Sutras is not a religious book?
Definitely not. Definitely not. It is a practice manual. And that practice manual is culturally, anybody can practice it without having to change any core beliefs. Practice, you practice, you practice. Abhyasa, vairagya, practice and detachment. And that beautiful state you arrive at is yoga.
Last question. If we want to look how long they stood the test of time, right?
2,200 years.
2,200 years. That's quite a significant, and it actually triggers a lot of questions. Why is it still standing the test of time till today?
It's still working.
In the world of technology. So what would be the key takeaways that we can focus on as we close this conversation today?
Today, the whole world is after mental health. Now, I've studied psychology. We've discussed this many a times. In fact, I graduated. The reason that I wanted more than just psychology is that psychology is just studying theories of the mind. And you want to go deeper. You want to understand your mind at a deeper level. Now, when it comes to mental health, how can this organism function with great joy without being trapped in the patterns and identity, yet be of use to society through the same identity? I'm a teacher in my identity, and therefore I serve society. But when I stop teaching, if I'm trapped, then I cannot be a free-spirited person. A lot of good people suffer from their own trappings. So can you be free and yet of service? That way.
Super. Thank you. See you next time.
Till we catch up again, once again, happy 10 years of International Yoga Day. Keep practicing. Let that mat never get rolled.
Okay, we're cropping before that for sure.
Right.
I'd like to